Our final speaker of the day, Jane Knight, exemplarizes the transformational potential of gardeners and gardening, both on environmental and social levels. Jane is the landscape architect at the Eden Project in Cornwall, England, a remarkable global garden that is an environmental education charity and a successful visitor attraction. Jane has a wide range of experience, having worked in the UK, as well as in the United States, Australia, and Hong Kong. She's involved in the ongoing development of the Eden Project, as well as Eden's numerous outreach and consultancy projects, which include work on a peace park in Kosovo, a botanical garden in Chile, mine restoration in South Africa, and advice on community engagement on climate change in Australia. Jane has also worked on Eden's Growing for Life project in prisons, working with community groups to promote nature-based play, and the ongoing development of a roof garden at London's South Bank Centre, working with ex-homeless and addicts. It gives me great pleasure to present Jane Knight.
Thanks so much, Annette. And thank you, everybody, for inviting me to come and speak to you. Particularly, I think Donald I have to thank for getting me here. Let me just work out the technology. There we go. And also, thank you for laying on the weather for me to make me feel right at home. Although I have to say, this is a bit extreme even for me. Now, I don't know about you, but my head is full of words and ideas. It's been a fascinating 48 hours, and I hope mine don't come out in a jumble, which they feel like they might do at the moment. I'm not particularly used to speaking to academic audiences, so it's all faintly terrifying, but it's a great opportunity for me to talk about Eden, and I think one of the perils of being one of the last speakers is that I've heard lots of things and points that I wanted to make raised by other people, and actually some of my slides I've actually seen already on the screen. But I think that's partly because of the nature of Eden and the nature of the subjects that we're talking about, because Eden is very much an active case study and a very relevant topic to be talking about. I'm sure many of you were at Emma Maris's great talk last night on the rambunctious garden. And in a way, she's sort of, I think, given me a lead in to my talk. She's talked about how, having fiddled with nature, the earth is our responsibility. And what do we want it to be in the next 500 years? Now, my question, and the question we ask ourselves at the Eden Project all the time, is who decides? And will nature let us decide? We know that nature can take care of itself. It has for millennia. It's adapted and evolved, and things have become extinct and other things have taken their place. But at the Eden Project, we ask ourselves, can we, all 7 billion of us, adapt to what's coming? This is a human dilemma rather than a nature dilemma. And it's particularly important now when, as a species, we're increasingly disconnected from nature and have a very sentimental view, I think, of what it's all about. As my colleagues say, the 21st century is going to be a white knuckle ride that will demand the best of us. We need to apply all our ingenuity, imagination, and intelligence, and we'll be required to work in ways that we've not worked before, to find new solutions to the problems that are facing us. And I think one of the first steps that Eden Project has tried to do is to bridge that reconnect with nature, and it's really, again, a project that helps people understand that we are not separate from nature, we are very much part of it. And most importantly, we depend on it, not the other way around. As Stephen said this morning, plants transform light into life, and that is our lives. So really our mission is to raise awareness and also to be positive. That's really important. We've got to, if we're going to make the best of this, we need to inspire. And that's really what Eden's all about. However, I'm totally getting ahead of myself, and I need to start at the beginning. Now, let me just get to grips with this. And here we are again, the Garden of Eden. I think everybody's probably had a different slide of this, and I picked one. I quite like the funky trees on this one. But in large parts of the Western world, the Genesis story really sets the tone for our relationship with nature. Several people have mentioned that what we're seeing here in the Garden of Eden is everybody living in harmony, but the relationships set up right from the beginning were not really very equal. I checked this in my Gideon's Bible last night. Man was very clearly given dominion over all of nature, and that's when the fiddling started, and boy, have we done a lot of that. So I want to start off really by framing Eden in the context of garden history, particularly in Britain. Now, our history of gardens goes back about 1,000 years. Now, I'm sure that the Romans, when they were around, they probably made gardens, but we never really talk about that when we were colonialized. So some of the earliest gardens were created around monasteries, using collections of plants for medicinal purposes and cooking. And in the Elizabethan times, this evolved into knot gardens. And really, they were creating patterns with plants, but plants that were very much, again, of a useful purpose to people. In Renaissance France, domination of nature was taken to extremes with the creation of these complex parterre patterns. Simple pallets of hedges were clipped within an inch of their lives, and nature was controlled on a vast scale as a symbol of power and wealth. And this fashion came over to Britain for a fairly short period, and this is actually a contemporary recreation at Blenheim Palace. But this is the landscape that Blenheim's probably more famous for, Capability Brown's work and the English landscape movement. The landed elite soon got tired of that parterre look, and probably we'd fallen out with the French again, so that's another reason why they weren't so popular. But this is nature controlled in a completely different way, and idealized to create an improved and more picturesque version of the real thing. And these were very much imitating landscapes seen in Italian art and on the Grand Tour, which was very popular for the elite at that point. Now, if we skip another 50 years, this is a very simplistic overview of the history of gardens, but I just wanted to do it to set the stage, really, for what we're trying to do. 50 years forward, British Empire was flourishing with commercial interests stretched far across the globe. It was also the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, and believe it or not, Cornwall, which is where I've come from and where the Eden Project is based, right in the southwest corner of England, was at the heart of technical innovation at that time. Based around a booming copper and tin mining industry, and a lot of the innovations that were seen at that time were as a function of developments in those industries. And there was also tremendous wealth created, and for the first time a middle class, and a lot of new homes developed with large private gardens. The early industrialists of this Victorian time, really, sponsored plant hunting expeditions to the Far East and beyond, and sort of an early example of assisted migration using the Wardian cases that Stephen talked about this morning. So Cornish gardens were full of these newly imported exotic plants sponsored by wealth from mining. And this is Caerhayes Castle, which is got a particularly amazing collection of magnolias and camellias. And so this part of the world, because this was not the only one of its type, was absolutely full of spring gardens. They're all at their peak in spring, which is another reason, Cornwall already has a reputation for gardening. And this image is particularly relevant to the Eden story. This is the Lost Gardens of Heligan, which is also in Cornwall, and you can see featured collections of exotic plants from the Far East and New Zealand in particular. And this was a garden that was lost to nature. There's a feature within the garden called the jungle, and this is what this is showing. And the garden was lost when the gardeners who tended it and kept it in this semi-natural state went off to World War I but never came back. But Heligan was found some 70 years later by my boss, Tim Smith, who later went on to develop the Eden Project. And so in a sense, this is where Eden started. But I'll come back to this again, so if you just keep that image in mind. And all these Victorian estates also had extensive vegetable gardens to feed a big house as well as many estate workers. So even in a sort of growing industrialised society, people were still aware of this connection between food and nature. And you can see just, those are the lost gardeners who never returned from war. Interesting other things were happening at the time. There was a huge migration of people from rural areas into cities to look after the industrial areas that were being created. And up until this time, gardens were really the domain of the wealthy with land and time and money to spare. But because of the rapid changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution and pretty horrible living conditions in cities and poor health, public gardens started to be created by early philanthropists and city officials. This is Birkenhead Park, which is particularly relevant to the story of Central Park in New York, because this is where the young Frederick Law Olmsted, on his tour of Britain, gained his inspiration for Central Park. And so I think you can perhaps see resemblances in the plan, this sort of ruralist kind of look that's shared with Birkenhead Park and Central Park. Again, skipping again, a reaction to all the Victorian plant introductions and the extensive bedding plant schemes that others have described. So another change in thinking, and Nick, I think earlier yesterday, was it only yesterday, mentioned William Robinson, and his work again was a reaction to all these introduced plants, and he was promoting a much more naturalistic approach with using a mixture of exotics and native plants to resemble a more humble cottage garden. And this is his work at Grave Time, and I'm sure there's lots of people in this room that are scholars of William Robinson and know far more about it than I do. But I just wanted to point out that all these movements are a sort of reaction to each other and a response to the time. And this is Gertrude Jekyll's work, who adopted a very painterly approach to planting design, influenced by the Impressionists with lots of subtle colour schemes. And she worked alongside Edwin Lutyens, who created an interesting partnership whereby her work softened his architecture. And then fasting forward to the 20th century, there's been a continual evolution in style. After the wars, obviously, few could afford armies of gardeners to look after these highly maintained spaces. So the styles moved very much towards low maintenance. Also gardens as high art, outdoor rooms with lighting and technology, and very much a response to kind of softening architecture. Some of these images, I'm sure, are familiar to you. So really the purpose of this rather simplistic canter through the history of British gardens is to highlight that once the basics of life are taken care of, we've pretty much tamed nature and created gardens. And also over time, that ideal human relationship with nature, as seen in a garden, has changed in response to politics, economics, and the social conditions of the time. However, if we leap over the garden wall or the garden fence, we have a rather less utopian relationship with nature. And I think, again, lots of other people have talked about some of the things that happen in the wider world. This shows the largest dumping ground for vehicles in the world, which is in the deserts out west. And that's just the start. Primary rainforest is being felled on an industrial scale to provide food for an industrial scale of rapidly expanding global population. This is soya growing in Brazil on former rainforest land. And we're only just beginning to understand the impact of this. We now know that rainforests play a major role in regulating our climate, and retreating glaciers are evidence of this and man-made climate change. I know that there are skeptics out there, but I think the evidence is there. And I think we've all experienced recently extreme weather events. I know we have in Britain and you have here. Is this a coincidence, or is nature evolving to adapt to us? So we're fiddling with these complex systems that we really don't understand. And then again, a comment that's already been raised earlier today about children and why it's particularly important, their disconnect with nature is particularly important for their own health and well-being, and also the fact that they are the future custodians. And these are the kind of places that we create for them. You know, nature very clearly behind the fence, and making sure that there's none involved in their actual play. Obviously, there's movements around to change all of this, but this is very much typical, certainly in Britain, and I think in other parts of the world as well. And this, we've talked about Richard Louv already this morning. Again, it's a big issue, and really, the Eden Project was created to help redress some of this balance. It was created at the turn of the 21st century to create a dramatic and spectacular modern garden to attract people. We know that people enjoy gardens, but once there, we've got the subplot of reconnecting them to the natural world and the importance of living with the grain of nature. So this is an aerial view of Eden. Now, I know at least 2 people who've actually been there. Any hands up? Anybody? Oh, okay, we've got a few. Well, hopefully this will be of interest to you. So Eden Project is a global garden. We kind of bring the world to you rather than you have to go and use lots of air miles to go and find the world. And because we live in a global culture and global food system, we are connected with all these different parts of the world. And the whole point of Eden is to highlight the importance of the natural world and our role in caring for it. It was a project that was opened in March 2001 and was created as a landmark project to celebrate the new millennium, and with funding from a mixture of sources that helped bring that forward. Now 12 years young, and we've welcomed nearly 15 million visitors, which is quite dramatic, really, for a project in such a far-flung corner of the country. So we're very proud of that. And as I said earlier, the origins of Eden really started with the Lost Gardens of Heligan and the Victorian Gardens. Eden Project was the idea of Tim Smith, who is not a gardener, but an archaeologist turned music industry mogul who dropped out of his career and decided to set up a recording studio in Cornwall. Wandering around the countryside in the late 1980s, I think, he found and fell in love with Heligan and set about restoring it. Now, he did that with an army of volunteers, and because he's a very media-savvy guy, it was all captured on film and became a TV series which certainly helped promote the cause. And it's now one of the best-loved gardens in Britain. But in the process, Tim, who's a convivial guy, shall we say, surrounded himself with experts and became fascinated by plants, but very much from a layperson's standpoint. and particularly plants that were useful to man. And he had the idea that at Heligan, perhaps they should create an exhibit that could highlight all these plants that were useful to man. And the experts that were around him sort of roared with laughter and joked that they'd need a couple of seriously large greenhouses to do this. And that was really where the idea of the Eden Project was sown. And where better to create a dramatic new garden than in another lost world. This is the Eden Project site, the site that was selected for Eden. And this is what it looked like in 1998. It was a huge hole in the ground, a worked out open cast China clay mine, and one of many that despoiled the landscape in this part of central Cornwall. Now the site is very symbolic. The idea that we could heal a site like this, a site that's been damaged by people, to show that humans, again, using intellect, ingenuity and imagination, could create something positive out of this negative space. And I wanted to just show this aerial photo because it shows the contrast that we have in Cornwall. As you can see, a very despoiled landscape, but set within a very beautiful area. The little map at the top shows where we are. And we're on this sliver of land right at the end of Britain, with a very beautiful coastline and a very busy tourism industry attracted by the sandy beaches. But really the industry that made Cornwall boom during the Victorian times is completely dead now. Mining, fishing, farming are all in decline, and so it's actually an area of high unemployment and high social deprivation. And the real reason that Eden got the funding that it did was not to restore the landscape or to set up an environmental charity to inform everybody about our connection with nature, but really as a social and economic regeneration project. So the idea of the garden was to create employment and to boost local businesses, which we have managed to do. So huge challenges really to go about rehabilitating this scarred site, and really achieved by quite an extraordinary coming together of professionals, constructors, and the client group, if you like, the nascent client group who had the idea in the first instance. And to show that when you work together, you can achieve what most people thought was impossible. Most people, I think, thought Tim was bonkers. And Eden was on the list of projects most likely to fail that were the landmark Millennium projects. However, that has not been the case. And I think everybody realized that they were working on something really special and therefore gave their best. So that point I made earlier about the 21st century will demand the best of us, Eden, I think, is an example of where that has taken place. And obviously one of the biggest challenges was there was no soil, so great place to make a garden. So we had to set about fabricating our own soil. It was all manufactured off-site from waste materials. The China clay industry produces a sandy type of substance, and that was mixed with green waste, and that was the basic soil type. Other challenges included 100 consecutive days of torrential rain, like we see today, just before opening. So it was a tough project, but it really bonded everybody together who worked on it at that point. And I know when I joined 18 months after opening, I felt like an infiltrator in a very private club. So I'm going to take you on a little virtual tour for those who haven't been. And this, if I was giving you a tour of Eden, this is the first thing that I would show you. This is in our visitor centre. And it's a very low-tech, like a small stage set with life-size puppets, animatronic figures, to demonstrate very simply what Eden's all about. And it's called the plant takeaway. And basically what happens is that you've got a normal domestic kitchen scene, and one by one, all the things that are made out of plants disappear. Coming, and we are, of course, naked. No food, no clothes, no windows, no shelter. and at the end the cat dies. And obviously we do as well, we've slumped to the ground as well. But I think the whole idea is this, it kind of sets the tone for how Eden talks about things like this. This is a really serious point, but it's still fun. You know, we understand that our visitors, most of our visitors are on holiday, and Tim is a great believer in the fact that hair shirts and, you know, denial do not make people want to change their minds about how they treat the world. So we want people to leave informed, inspired, empowered, and not depressed. So this is the kind of thing that we do. And hopefully that'll be memorable. This is our site. So you could see on the aerial photo that I showed earlier on, we've got, let's see if I can make this work, 2 enclosed biomes. That's the rainforest, which sits against our south-facing walls to capture the maximum light and heat. Our Mediterranean biome, which is another enclosed biome. We really wanted to have an arid biome, and we'd really like to have an ice biome as well, but we haven't quite got that far yet. And this is our main garden, which is our roofless biome, which obviously houses our temperate plants. And the core, where's the pointing on? There. The core is our education centre. So I'll just show you fairly quickly what's going on. This is a photograph of our outdoor biome, the outdoor gardens. And I nearly called this talk Eden Project Gardener's Paradox, because in a sense, it's a traditional garden in the sense that it's there to attract people who would just like to visit a garden. And then it's got this subtle undercurrent, well, not subtle, it tries not to be subtle at all, but to communicate this very serious message. So we lure people there, not under false pretenses, but it's sort of a garden within a garden, if you like. So a very, very contemporary design, not by me, although I have made interventions into it, but very dramatic shapes and forms which really express some of the shapes and forms that were there in the landscape and reflecting what was happening with mining. And then gradually, as you work your way out of the hole in the ground, it gets more and more naturalistic as you move towards the edge and towards the surrounding rural landscape. But because we are in a hole in the ground, we can create this sort of mad, slightly lost world landscape. And our local planning department doesn't mind what we do in the pit. And we have very, lovely gardens where we can explain about the whole history of garden flowers, for example. We have unusual plants used in unusual ways for Britain. And we try and make very stunning displays of things like vegetables. This is outside our cafe, where there's a very direct relationship between food and plants. And these are really a traditional Victorian kitchen garden, but shaped in a slightly different way. Still lines, but they're not straight. And so we've got this curved theme going throughout the whole of the garden. We really wanted to demonstrate crops growing on a scale, a crop-size scale. So we've got mass plantings of, in this case, hemp, which creates lots of interest. It has to be behind a fence, but this is not a narcotic version of hemp. But it is an extraordinary plant with its long fibres. It's used in all kinds of industries, including car making now, and can be used as a fibre in all kinds of construction projects. And then we've got barley in front, and we've got a beer exhibit to talk about barley. But the important thing here was we are a botanical garden, but we're a botanical garden of plants that are of everyday use. There's nothing exotic in our garden, we've got lots of exotic plants, but we're not about showcasing very special one-off plants that are the only ones of their kind left in the world, or that need any special care and attention. And we've also got things like lavender plantations on a large scale, things that you would see, and when this is flowering, it's absolutely stunning, and it buzzes, and it's scent, and it's a completely multi-sensory experience. And people, you would see things like this in Provence in France, but not usually in Cornwall. And this is our pollination exhibit with a big sculpture of a bee in it to make people, make the connection very clearly between the plants and the pollinators, which of course are a really important story at the moment. And then there's parts of the site that we develop as an allotment, again very popular, where people can take ideas away home. And this is an area where we've made an allotment to show the influence of multiculturalism on Britain, because all the immigrants, a lot of them have brought their own crops with them and things that they grow in allotments in all parts of the country. And this is to show that the diversity of vegetables has changed with those different populations. And then we create areas of the garden for people to discover. Really, when you can stand on the top of the pit rim and look down into the site, and you can pretty much see everything laid out in front of you. So what we wanted to do also was to create areas that you had to go into and discover. And this is the entrance to our exhibit about plants in myth and folklore, because plants are a very important part of used in stories and a lot of our traditions, and we wanted to celebrate that as well, not just the physical uses of plants. And so with all these crazy things going on in a small place, we had to divide the site up. So we've got structure, sorry, I'm talking design here. We've got these hedges that divide everything up to create rooms, very, very much in the style of that you would have seen in a traditional garden, but used again in a very different way. And then because of there's so much going on, we've also got calm areas between some of these exhibits, to an area where you can pause from being bombarded with information. And the rainforest biome is probably the jewel in our crown, and it's really where everybody heads to and make as their first point of contact, really. Housing the largest rainforest in captivity, and it was designed very much to allow the plants to grow to their full height, to give an authentic experience as possible. Now the plants now are nearly touching the roof. This is what it looked like on planting on opening day in 2001. This was the day that I dared venture up into our aerial lookout, which was more than terrifying. But the place is hot and humid and very much of a tropical feel. And we take people on a journey through oceanic islands, Malaysia, West Africa, South America, and then crossing a waterfall through lots of mini plantations with crops that come from these areas to highlight that this isn't just a jungle. We are dependent on these areas every day. So that's, again, opening day. That's the lookout. Because now the canopy is developing, we've created the lookout so you can look down on the canopy, because in real rainforests, that's where most of the life and the area that we don't know is, we know very little about what happens in rainforest canopies, and this helps demonstrate that. And we also have to create interesting ways to prune plants when they're high up. We can have rope access training and hang from the scaffolding, not the scaffolding, the structure, but also we've got a helium balloon, which is how a lot of canopy research is actually done. But also it's useful for our gardeners and also good for media opportunities. And what we're showing really in here is that tropical crops, everyday foods, we've got bananas. I can remember myself the first time I saw a banana growing and how exciting that was. And cocoa plants, and making the connection between this is chocolate. And children actually get very excited when they see things like that and have no idea that chocolate comes from a plant. And we've got lots of hands-on displays and things to discover. We've got a little market stall showing how coffee's traded, and a boat that's full of spices, talking about how trade with the tropics was really around spices at that time. And of course, we have to show the impact of humans on this environment and logging. and felling of trees and burning for to show you, like the picture I showed earlier. And there's an area the size of the biome, which is 1.6 hectares, lost every 10 minutes in rainforests. So that's where we highlight that story. Mediterranean biome, again, very, very different kind of experience, much cooler, a landscape that people are much more familiar with, really. And it's a very different sort of experience because it's much more centered and calm. People are much more familiar with this kind of landscape. And we talk about the plants from California, South Africa, and obviously the Mediterranean area, but then go on to say, this is where your oranges come from, this is where wine comes from, this is where olive oil comes from, all from plants. And people, surprisingly, don't, probably all very familiar to us, but a lot of people do not know that. The core is came a little bit later, actually, and was a new building that was based on the plant formations. This is a Fibonacci spiral, which is the model for the roof of the building. And this houses our educational exhibits to show basically what plants do for us. And the schools program is based here as well. So this is various exhibits about plant services and why we need to look after plants, because they're looking after us. Obviously, as an educational charity, the education program is really important, and we have about 30,000 children per year coming through our schools program, which varies quite a bit. This guy up here is actually quite famous in Britain TV explorer, and he comes to Eden and does demonstrations, and everybody gets very excited. And then we ask children to go around and find all the ingredients for a chocolate cake, and very hands-on activities. And even though we're all about education, we know that people learn about things in very different ways, and we're not really into just pouring information into people. Because we want the garden to reconnect people with the natural environment, we want them to go away caring. So we have to engage them, their heart, we have to engage the emotions. So the idea is that we want to create memorable experiences. So a lot of thought goes into our interpretation. And I'll just give you a few images. This is the kind of range of people that we get. Basically, we want to attract everybody, not just garden visitors, but people who wouldn't go to a garden. They're our target audience, really. Family is really important, and people come in all shapes and sizes, and mobility is a big issue for us and will be for a lot of places. So we have lots of hands-on activities. Learning by doing is obviously a much more memorable way of learning. Sharing stories. We sometimes forget the power of stories, and we actually have professional actors who are trained in storytelling and develop stories which they tell in different parts of the site to relate all the plant stories back to people. We want to get people involved, and we want to know what people think as well. So we have participatory things, so to give the opportunity for people to express their views. And we use art and poetry and cartoons. This is our Maya tapestry, which tells the story of chocolate, and it's really very, very humorous. I couldn't show the whole thing though. And then we've got some ephemeral art. This is actually one of my favourite things. This is an exhibit that we did to talk about climate change, and these roses, which lay on the ground during the winter time, are made out of unfired china clay, which is what the pit used to provide. And they gradually, as the season went on, melted back into the soil, really in a very symbolic way, but they were really very beautiful while they were there. And of course we have traditional signs, but we deliberately don't have a corporate look. We want everything to look handmade, so that this place is made by people. It's not something that's special or different. It's not corporate. It's made by people, and it's crafty, and authentic. Obviously, the cafes and restaurants are a great opportunity to, again, reinforce the story between food and the importance of food and plants. And we've just opened a bakery to do that. And again, the shop, again, lots of opportunities to talk about sourcing local, ethical, recycled, and for people to go away thinking that they do have some power in their hands. You know, we say your wallet is your weapon. You know, you can make decisions about what happens to a lot of other people's livelihoods by the decisions that you make. We were talking about children. This is the fence that stops the people getting into the hemp that we're required by law to have. But children will play everywhere, and like a lot of places, children are not really thought about in the design of things. But it was obviously really important that we want to engage children as they are one of our key audiences. So we've spent a lot of time adding things into the site to make it more interesting for children, but we wanted to do it in a very naturalistic way. And this is one of the things that I've been working on quite a bit. We've got a lot of paths that get very boring, so we've got stepping stones and little tiny cut-throughs that only children can fit through, just to make the kids feel like this place is for me. We've got a garden behind the school classrooms, which is all about spirals, but it's also just a fun place to be. And in the summer, we overlay a seasonal program on the whole site, really to draw people back fundamentally, but also to get people doing different things at different times of the year. Our peak season is really during the school holidays, so this is what we do in the summer. We make dens. You know, and I did that when I was young. Probably a lot of you did, but children nowadays don't make dens, it turns out. You probably have a different word for them, don't you? You probably call them something. Yeah. I think they call them cubbies in Australia. But anyway, so this has been absolutely fantastic, and we've been doing it year on year, and we've also included water play into it as well, just to really get children outside and away from their computers and to have fun doing something outdoors. And you know, we get these sort of heart-wrenching letters back to say, oh yeah, and having done it at Eden, we went home and this is the den that we made, and we've never done it before. So it's a really important thing. And we also have a whole load of other programs which are about taking people on residential trips, and there's actually a kid hidden in there. See the face? That's what we'd like all the kids to be. So they have a very direct contact, going out, sleeping outside. And during the winter time, we have an ice rink. So this is kind of our ice biome in a way. Again, to draw people in the winter months, we're an all-year-round attraction, because part of the economic model and part of the remit was to be a year-round employer, because a lot of the tourism industry is seasonal. But we do struggle on a cold, wet November evening to get people to come out. So we have a whole season with fire and lanterns and parades and ice skating, which is very lovely. And then to attract the least likely to go to a garden group, which are the 15 to 24-year-olds, probably even older than that actually, we have a whole series of summer concerts which are actually happening right now. This is particularly close to Tim's heart, obviously coming from that sort of industry from beginning. But we've had some great headlining acts, which again, everybody who comes to a concert gets a ticket to look around the gardens as well, either the same day or the following day. And so what we do a lot of research on our visitors, and we want to know what they think of the place. And in a sense, this is great that the thing that comes out most is inspired, because going back to what I originally said, what we want people to do is feel empowered and inspired to make changes, and obviously better informed. And we always talk about the Eden as being a sort of living theatre and plants and people. But obviously the prime thing is to raise awareness and our dependence on nature and to create these memorable experiences that help people then go on to get to care for what happens. So a slight shift in gear here. As well as doing those projects, working out on site at Eden, we also do transformational projects out of Eden to show that what people can do working together can achieve. Now, the big lunch is not, I'm not particularly going to talk about it, but it's a very simple idea really, and it's a national program that we've been running to get communities talking to each other again. Because in a sense, that's the first step in getting people to care about each other and to start having conversations about what they're going to do about some of these tricky issues. And this is something that used to happen a lot. I can remember when it was the Queen's Silver Jubilee, we had a street party, but things have died out and we don't know our neighbours anymore. And I'm sure that's probably the same, probably even more so in America actually. But so this is a national programme where we've had, last year we had over 8 million people all sharing lunch in their own communities. So that's an example of one of our transformational projects. But what I wanted to talk about briefly was a couple of the projects that Annette mentioned in her introduction. Ones that I've particularly been involved with, some very special outreach projects that have been particularly geared up with connecting people with nature who have become very disconnected, and what a powerful tool that can be. Growing for Life was one of our programs that very much started for dealing with excluded adults, people that we know will never make it to Eden, but we want to get the message across. This is a Victorian prison right in the middle of Dartmoor. It's an absolutely horrible, windswept location. And this is the project site. And I was sent out there to transform these areas into vegetable growing plots. And what was really interesting is that during that process, we discovered what we call buried treasure. You know, we think of, I mean, I've never particularly thought, before this project, I'd never particularly thought about prisoners and who they were or anything to do with that. So it was really fantastic to go there and find, you know, I would have done some designs and we would have ordered a load of materials for them to make these gardens and come back and they would be way more fantastic than the designs I'd ever come up with. And we found all these skills and passion and interest and desire to do something in these prisons. And it was really, I mean, when we first went there, the men didn't even have clothing that they could go out, wear outside. They just had indoor clothing. And they really appreciated the opportunity to get outside, get some sun, well, when there is any, on Dartmoor, which isn't very often, but also to grow things. And we had a lot of fun with it. They came up with a logo for their produce called Peas Release Me, and grown with conviction. And they made vegetable boxes that they gave to the members of the local community, who then, particularly the elderly, because it's a food desert, and the elderly people wrote back notelets to them to say thank you for sending us the vegetables. And that was such an important part of the process, that gift to the community and the idea that they were giving something back. It was actually quite a simple thing, but they really, really appreciated that. And so that turned into an expanded project, which then led on to us creating a garden at the Chelsea Flower Show. This was the biggest garden that has ever been made at Chelsea Flower Show, and it was absolutely mind-blowingly complicated, because we did it with 500 volunteers who had all been homeless and had suffered some sort of addiction or exclusion, and to put them in front of people at Chelsea Flower Show was absolutely extraordinary, because these are people who have probably been completely ignored by most of the people that would go to Chelsea Flower Show, and then they were ending up having dialogues about their work, which was all about what they'd grown, what they'd designed, and what they'd built. And it created a huge amount of pride and some great friendships, which I'll talk about later. So these are some of the people that we worked with. It was a huge logistical challenge, but what we did was divide the plot into 5 different sites, different themed areas, which were taken on by different groups who grew the plants, designed the areas, and I obviously coordinated all the design work so that it made sense at the end. But it was all their ideas, and we made a sort of mini Eden with an area all about growing vegetables. That plastic bottle greenhouse became probably the most talked about thing at Chelsea that year. This was a garden about the senses, but it turned into a sort of allegory of desolation into hope, which you can see from one side to the other. Again, with an extraordinary group of people with so much talent that they came up with these ideas. There was an area about medicinal plants and making potions, and this is a figure with all the different medicinal plants to heal different parts of your body, and it was actually made with the plants that do the healing. And that was all an idea of some teenagers from a hostel. This was about industrial plants, and this was an environment section where a little woodland camp was set up. Again, all within one garden. And then a very beautiful flowery bit. And the whole thing was sort of joined together by these sentinels, which represented the 500 people that we'd worked with during the whole process. And they were absolutely thrilled with their silver medal. But again, I think the key thing was the empowerment and the opportunity to showcase their own skills in this very elite environment. And from that project, we were invited to work at the South Bank Centre in London, which is one of the world's leading arts centres, right on the River Thames in the heart of London. This had been the site of the Festival of Britain back in the 50s. And again, very brutalist architecture. Don't want to offend any architects, but it's very concrete. And we were invited by the arts director to come and, in a sort of guerrilla gardening kind of way, to transform their roof deck, which had never been developed. It was always intended to be a roof garden, but it never happened. And the woman who runs the South Banks knew that to get approval to make it into a permanent roof garden would be really difficult. So she asked us and some of the people, the ex-homeless people that we'd worked with, to come and transform this. And again, putting these guys, who are now good friends, you can see where it is. That's the London Eye and the Houses of Parliament in the background. It's a fantastic site. Put them all to work, and then have them garden this area throughout the season, coming into contact with a very, very different group of people. Funnily enough, one of the guys that we were working with used to sleep rough underneath this building, and and actually told that story. Which was really quite shocking that. Before he'd gone through his detoxification, that's what he used to do. And we wanted also to show that you can transform very simply a concrete area into something that's incredibly productive. And this was within about 2 months of opening. We planted a wildflower meadow as well to attract insects. And this very quickly developed into a very lovely area that we don't know where all the insects came from, but they came. There must have been some flying around looking for places to hang out. And then that was to celebrate the Festival of Britain. But then, even though we'd made it as a temporary installation, we were invited back to develop it further for the Festival of the World last year, which was to celebrate the Olympics. So we put in some olive trees to symbolise peace, and there's Dave doing some graffiti on the Louvre seats, which we also had in the garden. And then through all of this, we managed to raise enough funding to put some of the gardeners through a proper training program. So they all came down to Eden for 2 weeks and did a proper horticulture training course, which was fun for everybody. This is them doing that. And 2 of them passed with distinction and all the others with merit. So, you know, they've done fantastic work. And this is last week, actually. This is the new area that we've just done at the South Bank. So having done a temporary garden, it's actually expanded organically each year with these guys' skills as well. So it's been an amazing story, and I just wanted to show you, you've probably seen this character, Paul, featured on quite a few of these pictures because he's got a very distinctive look, but I'll just read you this, the second bit. 7 years ago, I was a broken man, both physically and mentally, living on the streets with methadone, heroin, and alcohol addictions, numbing the misery of my life. How I got there is a long story. Today, I am employed as a horticulture teacher in our group, grounded ecotherapy, paying my own rent for the first time in 30 years. Horticulture has changed my life. And, you know, I feel very proud to have been part of that journey. You know, I think it just shows the power of gardening and the power of plants to heal us. Again, a theme that's been mentioned before. And again, very quickly, because I can see the time clicking away right in front of me. This is another really, really interesting project that I've, again, had the privilege to work on since 2003 in Kosovo, which is a place that I would never have really given a great deal of thought to, a part of what was the war-torn Yugoslavia, and to help create a garden to heal a community. For the benefit of those which I didn't know, the Kosovo's right there, in the middle of the Balkans, and obviously in the suffered during the war in the late 90s, suffered terribly. And this is where the story starts. The marks that you can see on the wall there are gunshot wounds, gunshot marks, where children and women and elderly people were taken out into this garden and shot as part of the atrocities that took place. And to cut a long story short, 4 of the children survived the massacre and were evacuated to northern England and started recovering with the help of a charity called Manchester Aid to Kosovo. They had the idea that they would like to create a park back in their own community. They'd really enjoyed the parks in their new home. And they asked me if I would help them with that process, because we were particularly interested in this whole idea of nature healing people and healing communities. This is what Kosovo is like. Obviously, I needed to go there to be able to get an understanding for how on earth you would start designing a place over there. Very grey, lacking. The people are the things that have colour, actually, in the artefacts. Very undeveloped. It's one of the poorest countries in Europe, with an average income of around $1,800 a year. No inward investment, untouched by globalisation. It's the only place I've been that's no Starbucks, no McDonald's, unreliable energy. The power usually goes off around 8 or 9 in the evening. But wonderful people. This was the site that we were given. This stream is actually an open sewer. So there were lots of fundamental things to be done to, and that, there was also some quite negative associations, because that grain silo was where snipers used to stand and pick off children who were in the school just down here. Pretty horrible stuff. But again, really fantastic to be part of this. So we talked to lots of people, had lots of workshops, tried to understand what they would enjoy, and came up with a master plan for a park, and then very quickly started to raise money from just very small projects to get things moving. And we took some bulbs out there so that they could be planted in the autumn with messages. The children all wrote messages of hope for the future in there and planted them with the bulbs. And the park has gradually developed over time. These are the Peace Boys of Podjeva who formed themselves around the idea of making a park and all started working. And over time, this is 4 years later, a central gathering area had been made, and I was told that they were ready to do some proper planting. So I ordered some plants and rounded up volunteers, and it was absolute chaos. These are some of the people who were planting. We had there's a whole, I could do a whole talk on this, but I won't right now, especially as I'm on 59 minutes. I know it says right here. Anyway, the transformation of the space was amazing, and when everything had finished, people were just overwhelmed by what had happened. It was all done within a week, so it was quite a quick process. But seeing all the people hanging over the fence and just looking at what we'd done was amazing. And then very quickly, women started coming out. Usually there's no places and no meeting places for women, so this was the first place they could go. The park was dedicated in 2009 with a peace banner and lots of flags. We all went out there and celebrated. We've done horticulture training courses with the gardens, and what's really interesting is that this whole initiative has actually sparked a whole load of other spin-off activities. There's a marathon that's run now. There's an IT project. There's a summer camp project, and the idea that the park and a simple act of creating a space and creating confidence in that community and a place to bring people together has really galvanized a whole lot of other activities and I think really helped that community. And the idea that it was just one, not a government organization, but just one community helping another is quite a powerful thing. So, we're at the end. So this, what I hope managed to get across was to summarize that we've had a changing relationship with nature as reflected through gardens throughout the ages. And really, the relationship now with nature is fairly broken. Eden Project, obviously, contemporary garden that lures in visitors by traditional means, beauty and drama and flowers, but then goes on to have this text about highlighting a wider relationship with nature and how we need to work with the grain of nature to live more sustainably. I also talked about a couple of Eden's outreach projects. And the title of the talk really took the theme of the symposium, that gardens is the place for our ideal relationship with nature, and wondered whether Eden Project was an emblem of this. But I think, as we've seen, that the relationship has changed over time, and I think Eden is a very contemporary approach to a garden that addresses some of those very, very important issues that we need to reconnect with nature. And the relationship really should be one about respect, harmony, and democracy. And I just wanted, I'm sure loads of people are going to ask me why the Eden Project was named the Eden Project. So I just wanted to include this quote from Tim Smith in his book, which I think probably sums it up really, that our relation with nature should really be in harmony with bounteous nature, unlike the original Garden of Eden, where we were having dominion over all of nature. We need to work with it very much. So I'm sorry that's been a bit rambling. And that's our website if you'd like to know more about it. And thank you very much.
I think we have time for just one or two questions.
Yes,
and,
sorry,
And then, no, that's fine, because we can carry on the conversation if Jane, if
absolutely.
you're willing
Of course,
to
yeah.
carry on the
Of
conversation over a glass of wine and some cheese and whatnot
Love to.
outside for us at a reception. The reception ends at 6 o'clock, and then the buses will convey people back to hotels. So here is Jane for...
Okay. Any questions? Probably just answered them all. Stunned, asleep. Sure, hi.
Well, I really appreciated all those projects that you're describing in this kind of spun off the larger projects. And one of the things that I just wonder about is the extent to which you've seen these projects be able to turn what seems to be a smaller scale event into something that's more of a larger cultural habit that people start to accept. So have you seen
Yeah.
different kinds of impacts in that way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's the interesting thing, is that you start off with a simple idea and something that you think is, a fairly straightforward project, and then it sort of galvanizes the community to do more, and to feel that there's hope and they haven't been forgotten and haven't been neglected, and that it's that sort of positivity and energy that then it spins off all these other things as well. Yeah, but no, that's very, very much what it's all about. And it's not really, it's organic as well. It was never planned like that. And, we work with some very, very passionate people who are really committed to these projects, and they've proved to be really worthwhile for those reasons. And I think that's it. I mean, if you put your heart and soul into something, I think that's the thing about the Eden Project. None of us are particularly well paid. We do it for love. But there's a lot of people there who really believe in what we're trying to do, and I think that hopefully that comes across and inspires other people to think differently. That sounds very utopian, doesn't it? Where do the people come from? The visitors, or from the people who are doing the work? They're from London. They're from London's East End, and they're from. They all met in a hostel for homeless people when they were all in recovery, and new people join along the way as well. I've now been working with them for 5 years, and there's a core team, but there's new people who've come, and it's really interesting to see how. Some of those longer-standing people have blossomed really with the project, and now they inspire. Now they do the inspiring. And the guy that I quoted, he's now absolutely passionate about British native wildflowers, and has, he's replaced one addiction with, well, actually several addictions with one addiction to British native wildflowers, and is absolutely, every time I speak to him on the phone, which usually lasts about an hour, he's talking about, Jane, I must tell you about this new wildflower and all the things, and he knows about all the things that they do as well. So it's wonderful to see that passion. Thank you.